everyone. We'll get started in a minute or two. I did want to mention a couple of things that are coming up at the Cornwall Library that you may be interested in. On March 20th, we're having Janet Navarra talk about her book, The Doctor's Blackwell. And on April 6th, we're starting a series by Mark Scarborough on Emily Dickinson. So if you're interested in those, you just go to the website and join. So here we are at the last session of this wonderful series. And I want to share with you a note that Roxana received, because I think it really certainly reflects how I feel about this and probably how a lot of you feel. So here is the note to Roxana. Your weekly readings and discussions filled with passion and insights have been a wonderful gift to us during this winter in isolation. Thank you. Each week, I've looked forward to finding out which passages you've decided to read during the sessions. I enjoy your readings as much as your comments and wisdom. And that's certainly how I feel, and I'm sure it's how a lot of you feel about how wonderful this series has been and what a joy it's been. So Roxana, thank you. Really can't thank you enough, but we're very grateful. Are you ready to get started, Roxana?
I am ready.
Okay, great.
So welcome everyone. I feel as if we have been through a long journey together. I'm getting to know your faces just as we're about to part. But this has been great for me, and I hope it's been a great time for you to share it with me. So I'm going to start. I want to thank the Cornwall Library for giving me this opportunity to share the book with all of you, and for the library's support and enthusiasm for this. It has been great to be a partner here. So this is part 8 of Anna Karenina, and I am Roxana Robinson, in case you haven't figured that out by now. So as we look at the final part of this book, remember the 3 characteristics we were looking at: velocity, intensity, and empathy that illuminate this book, and some of the themes that we have been following that Tolstoy has explored: adultery, marriage, the family, nature, death, the idea of moralities, and how to live your life as a man. So in the final section, Tolstoy is still considering those questions, although we have lost Anna, who has been the shining star in our celestial universe. But Tolstoy brings the narrative back to Levin and to his life and to these great questions that he's considering. So I'm going to read from $790. This is Levin, who is thinking. For the family to live as their fathers and grandfathers had been accustomed to live, that is, in the same cultural conditions and with the same upbringing of children, was undoubtedly necessary. It was as necessary as dinner when one was hungry. And just as for that, it was necessary to prepare dinner, so it was necessary to run the farming mechanism of Pokrovskoy in such a way as to produce income. As undoubtedly as it was necessary to pay debts, it was also necessary to maintain the family land in such condition that when his son inherited it, he would thank his father, as Levin had thanked his grandfather for everything he had built and planted. And for that, it was necessary not to lease the land, but to do the farming personally, to keep cattle, to manure the fields, to plant trees. It was as impossible not to take care of Sergei Ivanovitch's affairs, the affairs of his sister, and of all the muzhiks who came for advice and were accustomed to do so, as it was impossible to drop a baby one is already holding in one's arms. It was necessary to see the comfort of his invited sister-in-law and her children, and of his wife and baby, and it was impossible not to spend at least a small part of the day with them. All that, together with hunting and the new interest in bees, filled that entire life of Levin's, which had no meaning for him when he thought. But besides the fact that Levin firmly knew what he had to do, he knew just as well how he had to do it all, and which matter was more important than another. He knew that he had to hire workers as cheaply as possible, but that he should not put them in bondage by paying them in advance at a cheaper rate than they were worth, though it was very profitable. He could sell the muzhiks straw when there was a shortage, though he felt sorry for them, but the inn and the pothouse, even though they brought income, had to be eliminated. For felling timber, he had to punish them as severely as possible, but he could not fine them for cattle that strayed into his pastures. And though it upset the watchman and eliminated fear, it was impossible not to return the stray cattle. Piotr, who was paying 10% a month to a moneylender, had to be given a loan to redeem him, but it was impossible to let go or postpone the payment of a quit rent for non-paying muzhiks. The steward could not be let off if a small meadow was left unmowed and the grass went to waste. Yet he could not mow the 200 acres where a young forest had been planted. He could not excuse a worker who went home during a work period because his father had died, no matter how sorry he felt for him. And he had to pay him less for the costly months he missed. But it was impossible not to give monthly payments to old, useless household serfs. Levin also knew that on returning home, he must first of all go to his wife if she was unwell, and that the muzhiks who had been waiting for 3 hours could wait longer. And he knew that despite all the pleasure he experienced when hiving a swarm, he would have to give up that pleasure and let the old man hive the swarm without him and go to talk to the peasants who had come looking for him at the apiary. Whether he was acting well or badly, he did not know, and not only would not start proving it now, but even avoided talking or thinking about it. Reasoning led him into doubt and kept him from seeing what he should and should not do. Yet when he did not think but lived, he constantly felt in his soul the presence of an infallible judge who decided which of two possible actions was better and which was worse. And whenever he did not act as he should, he felt it at once. So he lived, not knowing and not seeing any possibility of knowing what he was and why he was living in the world, tormented by this ignorance to such a degree that he feared suicide, and at the same time, firmly laying down his own particular path in life. So in some ways, we're watching Levin as every man who is following his own path through life, testing his own life for the qualities that he wants in it, which are morality and kindness and generosity and a kind of humanity, being a good human being. That's what he's doing in this passage. He doesn't know why he is doing these things. He doesn't find a moral rule, but he knows these things are necessary for him to feel as though he's living rightly on the land, on the earth, on the planet. And he's responding intuitively to these things. These are not laws that are given by the state. The state doesn't tell him that he has to pay monthly fees to old people who can't work anymore. This is something that he knows as a human being. And he feels part of a tradition. He wants to hand the land down to his son as the land was handed on to him. So this passage is about many of these elements. It's about how to lead your life as a man. It's about the family and what the family responsibilities are. It's about nature, his feeling for the land itself, and this sense of humanity. And when we read this, it gives you a sense of rightness, a sense of somebody who is responsible to the land and responsible to this tradition of nurturing the landscape, making it fruitful and fertile, but also allowing the people who work it respect and allowing them to lead fruitful lives as well. This is part of his Tolstoy's response to nature, but it's also part of his response to the family. So as we read this book, we keep seeing variations on the theme of the family, and compare this passage with what we know about Stiva, who is utterly reckless and dissolute, and he has sold the wood on his wife's land. That whole wood has been chopped down, the timber sold to a merchant. And he's now taken part of Dolly's own dowry. She has signed over her family inheritance to him. And we know what he's going to do with it. He's going to waste it. He's a spendthrift and he's dissolute, and there will be nothing left for his children because he takes no responsibility. He's kindly, he's well-intentioned, but he's irresponsible. And we have that feeling that the family is at risk. Stiva has wasted his responsibilities as a family man, as a husband, and as a father, and as a landowner. And Levin, who is clumsy, who is socially inept, who doesn't know how to sit through a dinner or sit through a social call or come into an office properly, he is the person who has this feeling of the land in his hands and his responsibility of holding something. We also remember that Tolstoy himself was worse than Stiva. Remember that he nearly gambled away his entire inheritance and the property when he was in his 20s. And he had to take down the main section of the house and sell it to a local neighbor. And the only reason that he was able to keep the land was that an inheritance was suddenly left to him, and he was allowed to keep it through that. So he knows very well the risks of what can happen to an inherited piece of property and what can happen to the family. So we have Stiva compared to Levin in this passage, and we have Vronsky. And Vronsky's sense of family and the land has also been shattered. Vronsky has a beautiful piece of property. He has a beautiful family house. We're told it's built in the good old style, whatever that means. He's inherited it. It's a huge piece of property. He's very rich. He has no legal issue. He will never have children that he can pass it on to. He too has destroyed himself as a family man and as a landowner. And those things, those ideas are joined. And so it's Levin who doesn't know what he's doing, who could not explain it to you, doesn't know what the rules are, but knows that it's proper for him as a man to do these things, that if he comes in and people are waiting to see him, he must give up the pleasure of hiving the swarm. Not that that would be a pleasure for me, but for him it's a pleasure. And he must do that because he owes responsibility to the people who work his land, and he owes responsibility to the land itself. So in this passage, we have this sense of Levin as addressing the whole of Russia. Remember how huge this continent is. Remember the sense that we get of the vastness of the land. Levin is constantly wondering about that, wondering if the nature, the character of the music has been formed in response to the size of this landscape. So Levin himself is a sort of a stand-in for Russia, Mother Russia. This is how Mother Russia will take care of her land, her peasants, the landowners. This is the proper relationship between a person and the landscape. So we're moving towards some kind of resolution here. These questions of how to lead your life as a man, how to lead your life as part of the family. He's moving in this final section towards some kind of resolution of these. So the next passage that I want to read is on page 800. And this is where he moves towards a kind of spiritual awakening, as well as this understanding of what his larger responsibilities are towards the landscape and humanity. This is his connection to a spiritual presence. Levin had stopped thinking and was as if only listening to the mysterious voices that spoke joyfully and anxiously about something among themselves. Can this be faith, he wondered, afraid to believe his happiness? My God, thank you, he said, choking back the rising sobs and with both hands wiping away the tears that filled his eyes. Levin looked before him and saw the herd. Then he saw his own little gig with Raven harnessed to it and the coachman who drove up to the herd and said something to the herdsman. Then, already close to him, he heard the sound of wheels and the snorting of the sleek horse, but he was so absorbed in his thoughts that he did not even think why the coachman was coming to him. He remembered it only when the coachman, having driven up quite close to him, called out, "The mistress sent me. Your brother has come and some other gentleman with him." Levin got into the gig and took the reins. As if roused from sleep, Levin took a long time coming to his senses. He looked at the sleek horse, lathered between the thighs and on the neck where a strap rubbed it, looked at the coachman, Ivan, who was sitting beside him, and remembered that he had been expecting his brother, that his wife was probably worried by his long absence, and tried to guess who the visitor was who had come with his brother. He now pictured his brother and his wife and the unknown visitor differently than before. It seemed to him that his relations with all people would now be different. With my brother now, there won't be that estrangement there has always been between us. There won't be any arguments. With Kitty, there will be no more quarrels. With the visitor, whoever he is, I'll be gentle and kind. And with the servants, with Ivan, everything will be different. Keeping a tight rein on the good horse, who was snorting with impatience and begging to run free, Levin kept looking at Ivan, who sat beside him, not knowing what to do with his idle hands and constantly smoothing down his shirt, and sought a pretext for starting a conversation with him. He wanted to say that Ivan should not have tightened the girth so much, but that seemed like a reproach, and he wanted to have a loving conversation. Yet nothing else came to his mind. "Please bear to the right, sir, there's a stump," said the coachman, guiding Levin by the reins. "Kindly do not touch me and do not instruct me," said Levin, vexed by this interference from the coachman. This interference vexed him just as it always had, and at once he felt sadly how mistaken he had been in supposing that his inner state could instantly change him in his contacts with reality. So Bobby Ann Mason sent me a message saying, does anyone else think this book is very funny? I find parts of it wonderfully funny, and this is one of my favorites, when just as Levin is thinking that all his relations with the world will be different, he will be kind and loving with his servants, he will be generous. As soon as Ivan makes a single comment, which is that they're about to run over a stump, Levin snaps back at him, rude and imperious, as he always has been. And one of the things that's wonderful about this book is that Tolstoy, knowing that we think that Levin is Tolstoy, shows us all Levin's weaknesses and vulnerability. So he's making fun of Levin here, which I love. I love that exchange. "Kindly do not touch me and do not instruct me," says Levin. So this passage is also about Levin's movement towards a higher being, a higher level of spirituality, and that is a big part of the ending of the book. I think for me, it's controversial. I mean, it's not something that I feel it is as moving as the emotional parts of the book. For me, the emotional engine that runs throughout this book is not spiritual. And for me, writing about spirituality is very abstract, and I don't feel it as deeply as I do the rest of it. But it's very important to Tolstoy, and you may know that after he finished Anna Karenina, shortly thereafter, he gave up writing fiction altogether and devoted himself to spiritual matters. So this is part of his own shift towards this other realm of consideration. So it's an important part of the book. But there's also another part of the book that's important, and someone else in the audience, Lynn Mattoon, sent me a really interesting email in which she talks about, which I thought was a wonderful way of discussing this, she talks about how Tolstoy is always comparing the idea of the individual alone in nature, and the individual dealing with other people, the self with others, and how society is always a part of this book. And it's a really good point. And Levin keeps returning to nature. He keeps returning to the country where he feels he will be his best self. And whenever he goes into the world and deals with society, we see how society corrodes and corrupts. We see the social circles in St. Petersburg, which were not really very nurturing to begin with. Remember Anna going to that croquet game in which everyone is having an adulterous affair. The parties are full of kind of adulterous undercurrents. So you have a sense that the society is a place where falsity prevails and people are not encouraged to be their best selves. Even Karenina, who is a perfectly decent person before the affair, is cold and emotionally withholding and very judgmental. And he's a man that exists only in relation to other people. You feel that he has no self in this book, except for the few moments in which he releases himself from his bondage. For example, when he is at the sickbed of Anna, when she delivers her baby Annie, and Karenin feels himself overcome with a kind of generosity and love for both mother and baby, and he is freed from the strictures, the emotional strictures that he has imposed on himself, and feels nothing but love for both these females, Anna and her daughter. But at the same time, he feels that there is another force larger than he is that will move him, that will impose itself upon him, and that will require him to come back to return to the person he has always been, that person who is emotionally imprisoned. And that's what happens to him. He gives up that feeling of generosity, and that outside force also imposes itself. Remember that also a very comical scene in which Levin has to go and pay a social call on Kitty's friends. And he keeps asking her why he has to do it. She says he absolutely must. It's a social requirement. He has to do it. Their feelings will be hurt. It will be offensive. And he will be breaking the rules of the society in which he lives. So he goes, he talks about the weather. He wonders if it's time for him to leave. He starts to stand up. He sees from their faces it's not time. He has to put in another 2 minutes. He has to talk about something else. And Tolstoy wants us to understand how ridiculous this setting is, ridiculous the engagement is, but also how powerful it is. He cannot bring himself to leave, and he must go there. Kitty insists that he goes there. It's hardly malicious. There's nothing malign about this, but it's unnatural. We understand that this is not how people would respond in nature. Whenever we get out into nature, Levin returns to his best self, really. So when he's shooting, or when he's mowing, when he's walking the fields, when he's with the bees, he is the person he wants to be, until the coachman says a word to him and asks him not to run over a stump. Then he's in the world again, dealing with humans, and he cannot be his best self. But Tolstoy is constantly addressing this notion, this tension between solitude and nature, the human alone in nature, and the human in society. Let me see if I have anything else to say about that. And also this notion of Levin guiding himself through intuition and to his feelings of connection to some kind of larger spiritual movement that he doesn't understand and can't identify, but he intuitively feels a part of it. So intuition and feeling, even for Levin, who's not meant to be the passionate person here is Anna, but they play a great part in Levin's life as well. So the next part that I wanted to read is from on page 810. And this is out in the country at Levin's house, and he's with the prince and Kitty's whole family. The prince and Sergei Ivanovich got into the gig and drove. The rest of the company, quickening their pace, went home on foot. This is another aspect of the feeling that everything is good and natural in the country. Remember that comparison between Vronsky's country estate, at which everybody was sort of false, and what they did was, it seemed inauthentic. And in Levin's country estate, they go mushrooming, which is nurturing and right, according to Levin. So they've been out mushrooming.
Sorry, Roxana, which page is this again?
It's 810.
Thank you.
The prince and Sergei Ivanovich got into the gig and drove. The rest of the company, quickening their pace, went home on foot. But the storm clouds, now white, now black, came on so quickly that they had to walk still faster to get home ahead of the rain. The advancing clouds, low and dark as sooty smoke, raced across the sky with extraordinary speed. They were still about 200 paces from the house, but the wind had already risen, and a downpour could be expected at any moment. The children ran ahead with frightened, joyful shrieks. Daria Alexandrovna, struggling hard with the skirts that clung to her legs, no longer walked but ran, not taking her eyes off the children. The men, holding onto their hats, walked with the long strides. They were just at the porch when a big drop struck and broke up on the edge of the iron gutter. The children and the grown-ups after them ran under the cover of the roof with merry chatter. Katerina Alexandrovna, Levin asked Agafya Mikhailovna, who met them in the front hall with cloaks and wraps. We thought she was with you. And Mitya? They must be in Kolok, and the nannies with them. Kolok is a little wood that's near the house. Levin seized the wraps and ran to Kolok. During that short period of time, the center of the cloud had covered the sun, so that it became as dark as during a solar eclipse. The stubborn wind, as if insisting on its own, kept stopping Levin and tearing off leaves and linden blossoms and bearing the white birch boughs in an ugly and strange way, bent everything in one direction: acacias, flowers, burdock, grass, and treetops. Farm girls who had been working in the garden ran squealing under the roof of the servants' quarters. The white curtain of pouring rain had already invaded all the distant forest and half the nearby field, and was moving quickly toward Kolok. The dampness of rain, breaking up into fine drops, filled the air. Lowering his head and struggling against the wind, which tore the shawls from his arms, Levin was already running up to Kolok and could see something white showing beyond an oak, when suddenly everything blazed, the whole earth caught fire, and the vault of the sky seemed to crack overhead. Opening his dazzled eyes and peering through the thick curtain of rain that now separated him from Kolok, Levin first saw with horror the strangely altered position of the familiar oak's green crown in the middle of the wood. Can it have snapped off? Levin barely managed to think when, moving more and more quickly, the oak's crown disappeared behind the other trees, and he heard the crash of a big tree falling. The flash of the lightning, the sound of the thunder, and the feeling of his body being instantly doused with cold merged in Levin into one impression of horror. My God, not on them, he said. And though he immediately thought how senseless his request was that they should not be killed by an oak that had already fallen, he repeated it, knowing that he could do nothing better than this senseless prayer. He ran to the spot where they usually went, but did not find them there. They were at the other end of the wood, under an old linden, and calling to him. Two figures in dark dresses, they were actually light, stood bending over something. They were Kitty and the nanny. The rain was already letting up, and it was growing lighter as Levin raced towards them. The lower part of the nanny's dress was dry, but Kitty's dress was soaked through and clung to her body all over. Though it was no longer raining, they went on standing in the same position they had assumed when the storm broke, bent over the carriage, holding a green umbrella. "Alive? Safe? Thank God," he said, splashing through the puddles in his flopping, water-filled shoes and running up to them. Kitty's rosy and wet face was turned to him and smiled timidly from under her now shapeless hat. "Well, aren't you ashamed? I don't understand how you can be so imprudent." He fell upon his wife in vexation. "I swear it's not my fault. I was just going to leave when he began acting up. We had to change him. Kitty began excusing herself. Mitya was safe, dry, and had slept through it all. "Well, thank God. I don't know what I'm saying." They gathered up the wet napkins. The nanny took the baby out and carried him. Levin walked beside his wife, and, guilty on account of his vexation, squeezed her hand in secret from the nanny. So we've been talking throughout this book about scenes that echo each other or that are twinned, and this scene echoes an earlier one in which Vronsky comes to see Anna without her expecting him, and he finds her on the porch of her house outside St. Petersburg. She's in a panic because there's a storm and because Seryozha and the nanny are missing, and she, like Levin, is terrified that her child has been damaged during the storm. So Tolstoy creates this sense of peril and urgency by invoking the presence of the natural world, the enormous power that it has over humans, but also the sense of the fragility of the family, the fragility of children, the sense of peril that the mothers feel whenever a child is absent. Parents feel, this is Levin feeling it, and Anna, not just mothers. So he does this echoing scene in which the presence of the storm is much more powerful in this scene. And the sense of the child. Now, in the earlier scene, Seryozha and the nanny had sheltered under a pergola or in a summer house, so they hadn't gotten wet at all. And in this scene, the baby is underneath an umbrella the whole time, so he isn't wet either. But the big difference, apart from the power of this storm, in a sense that Tolstoy wants us to understand that at any moment, people can be killed, at any moment, the family can be riven. But remember, in this family scene, the mother is with her child. She does not allow the child to be taken from her. And that separation in the scene with Anna and Seryozha is the beginning of that split in which Anna allows herself to be separated from her child. That's one of the things that will drive her to despair. But in this scene, Kitty has been moving Mitya around. He's been fussing, so she takes him from one place to another, but she never lets him out of her sight. So that feeling of parental care and parental attentiveness is unbroken in the family of Levin and Kitty. So Levin also feels that he has engaged with this family, certainly at a greater level than Vronsky. When Vronsky arrives, he sees Anna in a state of panic, but he doesn't share it. Seryozha is not his child. So again, there's this feeling of rivenness, of the split between Vronsky and Anna, the split between Anna and Seryozha. So then I'm going to move on to page 816, 816 and 17. And this is where Tolstoy really sort of moves most deeply into a state of sort of existential questioning. And this is what he determines. Don't I know that the stars don't move? He asked himself, looking at a bright planet that had already changed its position over the topmost branch of a birch. Yet looking at the movement of the stars, I cannot picture to myself the turning of the earth. And I'm right in saying that the stars move. And would the astronomers be able to understand or calculate anything if they took into account all the various complex movements of the earth? All their astonishing conclusions about the distances, weights, movements, and disturbances of the heavenly bodies are based solely on the visible movement of the luminaries around the fixed earth, on that very movement which is now before me, which has been that way for millions of people throughout the ages, and has been and will always be the same, and can always be verified. And just as the conclusions of astronomers that were not based on observations of the visible sky in relation to the same meridian and the same horizon would be idle and lame, so my conclusions would be idle and lame if they were not based on that understanding of the good, which always has been and will be the same for everyone, and which is revealed to me by Christianity and can always be verified in my soul. And I don't have the right or possibility of resolving the question of other beliefs and their attitude to the deity. Ah, you haven't gone? The voice of Kitty suddenly said. She was walking the same way toward the drawing room. What, are you upset about something? She said, studying his face attentively by the light of the stars. But she would still have been unable to see his face if lightning, again hiding the stars, had not lit it up. By its light, she made out his face, and seeing that he was calm and joyful, she smiled at him. She understands, he thought. She knows what I'm thinking about. Shall I tell her or not? Yes, I'll tell her. But just as he was about to begin speaking, she also started to speak. Listen, Kostya, do me a favor, she said. Go to the corner room and see how they've arranged everything for Sergei Ivanovich. I'm embarrassed to. Did they put in the new washstand? Very well, I'll make sure, said Levin, getting up and kissing her. No, I won't tell her, he thought, as she walked on ahead of him. It's a secret that's necessary and important for me alone, and inexpressible in words. This new feeling hasn't changed me, hasn't made me happy or suddenly enlightened as I dreamed, just like the feeling for my son. Nor was there any surprise, and faith or not faith, I don't know what it is. But this feeling has entered into me, just as imperceptibly through suffering, and has firmly lodged itself in my soul. I'll get angry in the same way with the coachman, Ivan, argue in the same way, speak my mind inappropriately. There will be the same wall between my soul's holy of holies and other people, even my wife. I'll accuse her in the same way of my own fear and then regret it. I'll fail in the same way to understand with my reason why I pray, and yet I will pray. But my life now, my whole life, regardless of all that may happen to me, every minute of it, is not only not meaningless as it was before, but has the unquestionable meaning of the good, which it is in my power to put into it. So that is where Tolstoy ends this book, with Levin reaching a kind of understanding of what it means to believe in God and what it means to feel that you can put good into the world through your actions. I had one friend who emailed me and said, what do you think about this ending? I can't stand it. I think it ends with a dull thud. So there are a lot of ways to answer that question. For one thing, Tolstoy has created such an extraordinary narrative here. It is so complicated. There are so many characters. There's so many passages that remind us of earlier passages. There's so many themes that are running through the book that it would be impossible to end it in a way that captured everything at the same moment. And most big books, big long books, do end with a kind of arbitrary snip, as though somebody's just cutting them off. You can't end everything at the same moment and make it feel as it did throughout the book, though it's churning along with everything functioning in a vital way. So this is a kind of a strange, arbitrary ending, but I think Tolstoy wanted to address these larger issues, and he had ended Anna's life, and then he wants to go on and to consider these other things: the question of spirituality, the question of how a man should live in the world, how he should relate to society, what his responsibility is to his family. So he raises these issues in ways that are much more interior, much more abstract, much more philosophical than earlier questions about those in the earlier parts of the book. Many of these questions we saw dealt with through action, through scenes which had people interacting with each other and arguing, or disappointing each other, or making each other happy. And it was through that we understood how people should behave. But here he's addressing it in a very abstract way, and it becomes more remote as human experience. In the ending, he does this thing with Kitty that we may resent. He does have feelings about women which are kind of confusing, and both sort of alternately deeply respectful and condescending, it seems. So, and this ending in which Levin's mind is literally in the stars. He is considering the celestial movements, celestial harmonies, and how men always relate to the movement of the heavenly bodies and the celestial songs and what God means. He sees Kitty, gives her credit for a moment of understanding this spiritual conundrum. And then she asks him to check on the guest room. And he thinks, no, she doesn't understand it. And that to me, that's disappointing. I think that he could give her credit for understanding something more closely to what he is understanding. He's given us that feeling before. And here he shows us that Levin doesn't really think Kitty can follow him to the far reaches of intellectual thought. But he does, so the passage ends with a new level of self-awareness, which is what Levin reaches throughout this book. He's always reaching new levels of self-awareness, which is really what it's like to be human, continually understanding something new and thinking, this is how I should address it. And it always contains a thread of humility, which is one of the things that is so endearing about Levin. He's never perfect. He always recognizes how clumsy he is, how many mistakes he makes, and he knows he will continue to make those mistakes. So here we have it. One of the great novels, one of the greatest novels ever written. I certainly think it's that. And just to recap, to remind you all of what we've been dealing with, these three elements of velocity, intensity, and empathy, those are gleaming presences throughout this narrative, throughout this text. Tolstoy writes at a dead run. He writes in racing gear, so that all of these scenes, as you remember them, all show action. They all show conflict. They all show characters who are interacting with each other and needing things, wanting things, failing, succeeding, but always with this sense of human energy, vitality, and passion. This is a book about passion. So everyone in this book needs something, wants something, and tries to get it. Most of them fail most of the time, but Tolstoy gives us a sense of the urgency of these emotional needs. So this book is driven by characters whose lives we enter into and whose feelings that we share constantly. So to remind you of some of the themes we've talked about, these themes of adultery, marriage, the family, be aware that the book starts with a very unhappy family. That great opening scene of Steva Oblonsky and the affair he's been having. And he's now sleeping in the dressing room. The governess who's probably pregnant. The whole house is in an uproar. And it ends with a happy family, with Levin and Kitty. And in between those two families, the unhappy and the happy, rises this arc of Anna and Vronsky, who destroy one family, try to create another out of the shards of the shattered family, and fail to create anything, create a tragedy. So this notion of the family is very, very present in this book. There are many themes that are important, but the family is one of the most central. It's something that Tolstoy took very, very seriously. So we start out with that family, and it seems like a digression. Why do we start with Steva and Dolly when the book is about Kitty and Levin and Anna and Vronsky? But it is the theme of the family, and this is so Steva's family is shipwrecked because of him, because of his recklessness. It's saved by Dolly, who is a good wife and a good mother, and she can't bring herself to leave Steva for many reasons, some practical, some emotional. So that family will continue to exist because Dolly is a good wife. She's a good mother. Anna destroys her own family, and she does it because she can't help herself. And Kitty and Levin create a good family that will endure. And we are told over and over again that what Levin is trying to do with his treatment of the mujiks, treatment of the land, he is creating something for his family. So the family is huge. Also, Levin's relationship to his brothers is very important. His feeling of obligation, his feeling of emotional responsibility. So the sense of the family is enormously important. Kitty's family, when she is sick and needs support, is a very powerful presence. That's a family that Tolstoy respects and admires. It's a family that gathers together and shelters its members, protects them. So the question of morality is one that is really complicated in this book. We've talked about how Tolstoy absolutely believes in morality, believes there is nothing that's not lawful that can be right. And there's that letter from his sister saying these Anna Kareninas shouldn't do this. If they only understood what was facing them, they would not rush ahead this way. Tolstoy believes in morality. He doesn't believe in lawlessness. He certainly doesn't believe in women's liberation. And yet he feels so much empathy for Anna, who destroys her own world. He feels such empathy for her, and he makes her into a character. He creates her as a character who is so vital, so energetic, and has so much emotional generosity. She has so much to offer to the world in terms of her emotions, that she is a mesmerizing character. And even though morality is against her and her actions have destroyed her life, Tolstoy doesn't give up on her. He doesn't let us give up on her. He makes her into a character who I find deeply sympathetic. There were a couple of comments, so I just want to respond to a couple of things that were said last time. Someone said, is she a drug addict? Is she addicted to morphine or opium? And was she suffering from postpartum depression? In my view, she is neither of those things. She is not a drug addict. She is not suffering from depression. She is at the center of despair. She has been twisted into a vice, a trap that she can never release herself from. She has lost everything in her life. She's not a drug addict. This isn't because of drugs. She simply can't face the night on her own. But be aware that what Tolstoy is talking about, these are not outside elements that are destroying her. This is what's happened inside her head. She has said she loves two people in the world, both of them more than herself. One is Vronsky and one is Seryozha. She will never see her son again. Nothing she can do will restore her son to her. Karenina will never give her a divorce. And even if he did, he would not give her their son. So she has lost her son forever. She has lost all her friends. No one will come to see her. She is reduced to sitting at home, waiting for Stiva to bring some drunken bachelor back after a party. That's who she sees. That's her social circle. Even her louche aunt, her aunt who sponges on rich relations, has given her. No one will see Anna. She will never go to the opera again. She will never go to the ballet. She will never go out in public. She's a pariah. And that's a terrible punishment, being shunned. So she has lost her social life, the world that she knew. She cannot restore it. And although Vronsky, everything we have seen shows that he is going to be true to Anna, he's also a mystery man. We don't really understand him. And we know that at any moment, he could come home and say, Anna, I've talked more to my mother and I think that she's right and you're not happy and I can't make you happy. And so it's best that we part. And I'll give you a house on the estate, but we have to part, and I have to, for the sake of my family, I need to marry and produce heirs. I can imagine him doing that at any moment. We never see him start in that direction, but we see him losing patience with Anna, and she has no protection at all. So she is in a state of constant despair. Nothing can save her. And Vronsky is unintentionally gaslighting her. So he comes home and he says, Anna, what's wrong? What's the matter with you? You've got this nice house. Why are you upset? I've just been to a bachelor party where we watched a woman in a bathing suit perform for all the men, and you seem upset by this. And I'm going to go to the stables tomorrow and the races after that, and then I'm going to go to the Zemstvo. But why are you upset? What's the matter with you? And meanwhile, Anna sees her life closing around her like a vice. So, and she's frightened that at some point he will stop loving her. And I can understand why she's afraid. So she is in a vice that has been created around her and that she has been party to. So to me, she is a victim of despair, not of any outside force. And Tolstoy creates that very, very movingly. And her ending is really the ending of the emotional part of the book. It is that descent into darkness is really the end of that. The sky that has been lit up by this brilliant comet, the comet that is Anna Karenina. So as a literary matter, be aware of the power of this book, the way Tolstoy engages us, engages our emotions, makes these characters real. And also of the modernity of it. We mentioned the stream of consciousness, the way we enter into these characters' minds, which is really unheard of. I mean, he is prefiguring what happens in Proust and Woolf and Joyce, but that was 30 years later, actually 50 years later. So it's amazing that he simply does this. There's no precursor for him. He just does it because he feels such empathy for these characters, including the dog, that he can do it. He simply goes into their minds and says, this is how I feel as Anna, as the dog, as Levin. So let's see, what else did I want to say? Just that he asks these existential questions about how to lead your life, how to be a good person. What does that mean? And also, one of the things about this book is that there are three great scenes in it that are very powerful and mysterious. The two deaths, Nikolai and Anna, and then Kitty's birth. And those three scenes hold human mystery, the mystery of the transformative shift from life to death, from pre-birth to life. And he renders those with such intensity, such attentiveness, such a feeling of kind of the unknowable being made known, that it elevates this book. It gives it a presence, a largeness, because he is willing to, he dares to approach these moments of these three moments, two deaths and a life. One death which we watch through Levin's eyes, it's not someone who's experiencing it, and one death that we watch unbearably through the eyes of the person who is dying. So be aware of his extraordinary courage as a writer. It's, those of you who are writers, you know how scary this would be to try to enter into those lives, those minds at that moment. So be aware of the way emotion colors all the scenes. For example, Levin's joy at the moment when he is going back to see Kitty's family, when he's going to ask for her hand in marriage, how his joy illuminates all of Moscow, and how Anna's despair darkens her world, the world of St. Petersburg, as she's on her way to the train. The way Tolstoy creates these emotional backgrounds for a scene, and the way nature is present in all these scenes. So so here you have it, and be aware of Anna's great strength and power. I call her a shooting, I don't know if I said, she is a shooting star in this celestial theater. She is magnificent, she's noble. So although she destroys herself, she is a noble character of great depth of emotion, great depths of feeling. She's intelligent, she's generous, and she's more powerful than anyone else in the book, in fact. She carries this book. If this were a book without Anna and Vronsky, it would be a very muted, small book. Anna's magnificence, the magnificence of her rise and of her fall, are what gives this book the brilliant flame-like quality that it has. So, and all of these other themes, the themes that Tolstoy approaches, politics, the role of the mujiks, the women's question, these rather dry philosophical questions. As I said before, I find those passages tedious, but I also admire Levin for wanting to know the answers to these questions, for considering these questions, for thinking that those are part of what a man should know, what a man should think about, what he should do, how he should deal with them. I don't care about his political philosophy, but I admire him for wanting to figure out how to deal with these things. So it's incredibly rich. This is like a symphony, this book. There are so many themes, and which are rendered over and over again with variations. We see them played out. We see the echoes of earlier themes. We see harmonies played. We see different, I don't know enough music to know all the terminology, but you understand what I mean. We hear the strings coming up. We hear the brasses. He makes this story into something enormous and so rich with so many elements. So much love in this book. There's so much delight in the natural world, in the world of relationships, in what is possible to be a person, to be a human. So I'll remind you of the letter that Tolstoy wrote to his friends, to his friend, about his friend's novels. He says, both your novels are written on contemporary themes, problems of the Zemstvo, literature, the emancipation of women, etc., obtrude with you in a polemical manner. But these problems are not only not interesting in the world of art, they have no place there at all. Problems of the emancipation of women and of literary parties inevitably appear to you important, but these problems splash about in a little puddle, which only seems like an ocean to those whom fate has set down in the middle of the puddle. The aims of art are incommensurate with social aims. The aim of an artist is not to solve a problem irrefutably, but to make people love life in all its countless, inexhaustible, manifestations. If I were told I could write a novel whereby I might irrefutably establish what seemed to me the correct point of view on all social problems, I would not even devote 2 hours to such a novel. But if I were to be told that what I should write would be read in 20 years' time by those who are now children, and that they would laugh and cry over it and love life, I would devote all my own life and all my energies to it. So here we are 140 years later, laughing and crying over this book and loving life. All of you should feel proud to have read this book, and all of you should feel my gratitude to all of you for taking this journey with me. It has meant a lot to me to have you participate. I like your questions, I like your comments, and I feel as though we have created something together. So I will leave it here and open it to your questions and comments. And thank you once again for being part of this. So anyone who wants to say something now?
Okay, I'm just going to try to unmute everybody.
Yeah.
Let them unmute themselves. 1 second. Okay, and if anyone can't unmute themselves, just send a message, a chat in the chat to the Cornwall Library, and I will unmute you. There were a few people I had to mute. Sorry about that.
Hi, Mike Hess here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Mike, okay. One of the gentlemen earlier said that the ending kind of seems tedious, and it sounds like there was another criticism, the ending seems tedious. I think for me, part of the reason for that, even though the content is good, has to do with like the aesthetics of how plays and novels work. So I remember when I studied that in, I don't know, high school or college, the teacher said, okay, the thing's going to build up and then there'll be a climax. Then after the climax, there's usually a short, what she called denouement. All right, so a kind of a resolution or tying together a strand. So it seemed like this section was long for a denouement. You know, we had the climax, okay, tie it up a little bit. The boy's going to go here, the husband's going to go here. Here's what the musics are going to do, but it was long for a denouement. I think that certainly got to me. I appreciated the content, but it was long for denouement. I think that threw me off in terms of my aesthetic appreciation of the ending.
I agree. I mean, there are lots of people, and the editor of the magazine didn't want to print the final chapter, the final part. He said the ending of the book is Anna's death, and that's where it should end. And you can, but by this time, Tolstoy was a national hero, and
Yeah.
he was, you know, beloved. And you can imagine his response. He said, this is the end of the book, and this is what I'm printing. There are a number of different versions of it. And until, I don't know, about 20 years ago, people kept saying, no, this is the real version. This is the real version. And that final section was very controversial, and it was also considered very topical. And Tolstoy was making a point about the Pan-Slav movement, which a lot of people disagreed with. So that was a source of furor. So it rouses a lot of controversy, and a lot of people agree with you that it's tedious, and it seems abstract. It moves into the world of abstraction much more than the rest of the book. So I'm not going to defend it, but I also want you to remember that Tolstoy wrote it over a period of 4 years and in parts. So he never held the whole thing in his hands and said, okay, this is how I want this to move. He was just writing as he went along, sort of. So I don't think he was shaping it the way he might have if it had been written all at once.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of jarring to me that in the last section, I don't think Anna is mentioned by name. Her a few times when Vronsky shows up, etc., but never by name. And that was like, whoa, wait a second. How can you not mention her by name? Like she had become a non-entity. And I thought that was somehow very hurtful in terms of her own her own life, which you described it as a noble life, I think there were facets to it, like her vengeance, the way she died. She really wanted to get back at Vronsky. So maybe a little less than noble, but just not to mention her by name in that last section was jarring.
That's a really good point. I wasn't aware of that. Certainly Vronsky's mother won't use her name. She hates Anna. She thinks Anna has destroyed her son's life, and maybe he has. I think Tolstoy wants us to assume that Vronsky does die on the battlefield, does die a hero's death. But I wasn't aware that Anna's name is not mentioned. That's a really good point. I think Tolstoy is ambivalent about Anna. He wants to make a point about morality, and he fell in love with her. She is a wonderful character, but that's a really interesting point. If her name is never used, that's very strong. Yeah. Any other comments?
Roxana?
Yeah.
Linda English.
Hi, Linda.
I'm not in New London. I'm in David, Panama. Competing with a windstorm here. I just want to thank you and everyone for this whole journey, and the letter that you just read. I was really bubbling up here. So thank you. Just a wonderful and important journey all the way around. And to the translators of this book, oh my gosh, kudos.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
Thanks
All
for
right.
coming in from zooming in from Panama.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I could get through, so this is great.
Roxana?
Second that and say that this is one of the best experiences I've had, certainly the best COVID experience, and one of the best intellectual experiences I've had since I took Heritage of Fiction at Hopkins. It really meant a lot to me these last weeks, and I adored every minute of it. So thank you very much. And I have one little question that's totally not literary, because I wanted to see if there were, about the movies of Anna Karenina, and I saw there were about a dozen. So I was wondering if there's one that you like or not.
So here's my rule. When I teach this course, the course in which Anna appears, I teach Madame Bovary, Anna, and Virginia Woolf. Anyway, my rule is we may not talk about any movies in this class. And the reason is that it always derails the literary conversation. People start saying, but didn't you love that scene? What did you think about that? And we stop talking about the book. So, and I also never see movies of books that I love because they always jar on me. It's not the way I imagined it. It seems wrong. And also any movie about a past story is mostly about the clothes, and they always seem very artificial to me. So I have not seen any movies about Anna Karenina. I know there are many, and I know people have favorites, but I am a completely ignorant about them. So I can't offer anything informed about that.
Can we talk about the epigraph?
Oh, yes. So I think it's mystifying. Oh, I meant to look it up to see the context in the Bible. I mean, lots of people in my family were ministers, so we had lots of reference to scriptures in our household, and I think the part that is, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And the point is that it's not for humans to take vengeance. It's for the Lord to take vengeance. And he moves in mysterious ways, and it's not going to be an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's going to be on his scale and in his time. So humans should not believe in taking vengeance. The I will repay, I don't understand. And I also think that Anna is saying at the last minute that she wants Vronsky to pay, but that's not really why she takes her life. She takes her life because there is nowhere for her to go. That would be a very small childish emotion as a reason for doing something so monumental. And that's really a proximal cause. It's not the original cause for that. But I would like other people's thoughts on this. Does anyone else have any sense of understanding of I will repay? I don't see the Lord as a vengeful Lord in this book. I don't see God as smiting anybody. So I don't know who that is. I will repay.
Mike
Well,
here,
I'm thinking
I think that the repay here could be just a King James Version type translation. Repay could have a number of different meanings, including, compensate. I will compensate or make up. I will bring equity to it. That's kind of how I read it. I'm not sure repay is necessarily a get back at you and punch you in the face type thing. I think it's more compensation oriented in the sense of, the word karma hasn't been mentioned, but maybe more like that. Like, it's under my control. It's under the deity's control. So don't you do it. Because part of the reason humans shouldn't do it is because of unintended consequences. You sort of get somebody back, but then do you really? There are other things that happen that you didn't really want to happen as part of the vengeance. So I took the repay as having maybe a softer, more karmic type meaning.
I'm thinking that with respect to the extended ending, and also this business of vengeance, what I ended up thinking as you were talking about the extended ending was the ending of the overcoat. Because in that story, you have all this action, but then suddenly he's dead. And then we're going into this very woozy kind of ending in which he's a ghost. He had no possibility of improving his life. He's dead. And then suddenly we're in this kind of spiritual world, and it's not really quite realistic anymore. And there's vengeance. There is vengeance, but there's no God mentioned, I don't think. It's more of a universe type thing. The other thing is, I think of the death of Ivan Ilyich. It's about somebody dissipating. And he's not dissipating because of any socially unacceptable actions he's taking, but he's separating from the world of other humans. They've forgotten about him. He's lost. This is kind of like Anna is lost. She's separated from the world of other humans. And there's not that much left for him. I mean, how many books are constantly about death?
Well, the death of Ivan Ilyich is for the rest of you who haven't read it, it's about a man who's dying of he gets up on a ladder to fix a curtain, and he falls and he injures himself, and that injury festers, and months later he's in unbearable pain and dying, and it's just the slow progression of this infection that takes him over and kills him. There's no moral judgment in this story. It's more of the sort of celestial movement of God against the human body. So it's a very different kind of story. But Tolstoy was deeply interested in death. Actually, at this period, Russia was experiencing a kind of a wave of suicides. I don't begin to know why, but death was a powerful presence. The Bishop, one of Chekhov's great stories, is about the bishop dying during the story. So death was definitely something that was a subject that people were interested in. And this book, I think Tolstoy raises it to a level of extraordinary power. So I think that the death of Ivan Ilyich is more like the death of Levin's brother Nikolai than the death of Anna. It's something that Nikolai has no power over. It's the movement of death through the body. It's not, there is no question of he brought this on himself. He deserves it. There's no moral judgment. But Tolstoy's fascinated by this shift from one form of existence to another, if death is an existence, this transformative passage.
Roxana?
Yeah.
From something as lofty as death to something as mundane as a toothache. Where does that come from?
So isn't that great? Isn't that a great shift? Because so we're all devastated by Anna's death. We're still in tears, depending on when we stopped reading that passage and started the next. And there's this, there's this buildup of people on the platform and people whispering, and this is the train, and all these people are going, and there's a national movement towards a heroic encounter on the battlefield. And then there's an idea of Vronsky, I think he's on this train. So he creates this wonderful backdrop of excitement and interest and a kind of a titillation of a voyeuristic excitement about Vronsky, who is now, he's the man for whom this woman killed herself. There's little that's more exciting and sort of salacious than that notion. And there he is on the platform, walking with a slouched hat and walking with his mother. So Tolstoy does this to us all the time. So he creates a heroic figure, something that is larger than life, something that we all sort of stand in awe of. And it turns out he has a toothache. That's what's really bothering him. He can't stand it. And for those of us who've had toothaches and remember, this was before anesthesia, there were no, the dentists weren't what they are now. He was just going to have to wait for 2 days while his mouth throbbed. And that takes you over. Having a toothache is bigger than having your lover kill herself. That is more present in your point of view than Anna's death. So Tolstoy does this to us over and over. He makes this, he makes a mockery of things that we take seriously, and he raises things that we take comically to levels of nobility. So I love that. I love the toothache.
This is the man who
Thank you.
This is a man who had beautiful teeth, remember?
That's right. Good point.
Very true. Yeah.
That's right. We always are aware of Vronsky's tooth issue, the state of his teeth.
It's a nice little.
I think that the epigraph relates to the toothache and the movement of the stars. And for me, the epigraph is, there is a force greater than all of us that pushes us and sets us in motion. And we, the puppet master, and we are, with our grand lofty thoughts and our great loves and our petty characters and our toothaches and, bees getting caught in beards, all that, it's all of a piece. The sublime and the ridiculous. And I think that there's, I think he's saying that we are not entirely in control of our fates.
Absolutely. There's definitely that feeling that there's a higher presence that is mysterious to us, unknowable.
Roxana, Jeff Hamlin, do you think perhaps that the epigraph, vengeance is mine, I will repay, is maybe a quiet criticism of Anna? Because the passage, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. To give place unto wrath means to move away from wrathful thoughts.
I don't think of Anna as being wrathful. I know she says this will make Vronsky unhappy, but we've all honestly experienced that. I hope fewer and fewer times the older we get, but we all remember what that was like to be a child and say, I hope I fall under a car and that will make my mother understand how great I am. But it's minor. That's a really minor moment in your life. And that's not what was driving Anna. If Anna had had a life that allowed her any kind of hope or happiness, she would not have been thinking, I want to make Vronsky unhappy. That wasn't the issue for her. That was not the great motivating factor for her. It was that she had lost her son forever, and she was afraid she would lose Vronsky. And I think she was right. She would have lost Vronsky. So she
find it hard to
had an unbearable life.
why, it's an enigmatic thing to have at the beginning of the book. And I was seeking some way in which I could make sense of it.
Well, I like the
I
idea
like my version.
that repayment is simply the Lord saying, I will sort of take care of it. Humans should not consider vengeance. I will be in charge of everything, so that we're to see the entire movement of this book, all the different characters in it, and all of their all these plot lines are in the charge of the Lord, and he will take care of it. I think. But the thing is that the Lord doesn't seem like a presence in this book until the end of it. So looking backwards, it doesn't feel to me like a book in which we are expected continually to remember the deity and that he is in charge of these things. The rest of the book feels as though these characters are in charge of their own lives and that their emotions are driving it. So this epigram feels to me unconnected to the rest of the book.
Connie Ellis here. I do like the King James translation. To me belongeth vengeance and recompense. That makes it a little more gentle than vengeance is mine. And I believe you just stated really what the meaning of all that is. Could I make just one more comment or throw it out? We deal with death in this novel so amazingly, but to me, psychologically and psychically, the excruciating scenes between Vronsky and Anna, the destruction of love that comes through this terrible, really, I could hardly read them. They're so painful and they remind me so much of so many things we've all been through in life. That destruction to me is a great thing. You mentioned the spiral of despair. I totally agree with that. I think she had no more options, but the destructive power of love and life is simply overwhelming in this novel. And thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And thank Tolstoy. I mean, he just creates this magnificent construction of human passion. And he gives credibility and a kind of integrity to this structure, so that he makes us understand that passion is going to create a life. It is going to create a structure for people's lives, and it may not be the right one. It may be a terrible one, but that this is a force that is almost undeniable. So I just can't say enough to show my respect for what Tolstoy has accomplished in this book.
Roxana, having just said that, when Tolstoy went on to sort of disdain these books, did he really mean that? I mean, he goes on and he writes all of these other books about his spiritual journey and really almost feels ashamed that he'd spent all that time with War and Peace and Anna Karenina.
It's a mystery. Yes, thank you for raising that. I can't explain Tolstoy. I will tell you, I feel the same way. I think it's paradoxical. And as we know, a lot of what Tolstoy says seems paradoxical. And that passage that I read about him snapping at the poor coachman after having just decided that he was never again going to be rude to his servants, he is immediately rude to his servant. So, he chooses celibacy. He makes his poor wife have 13 children, and she's never allowed to go to Moscow. She's never allowed to have a real social life, which she longs for. But he also becomes celibate and won't touch her although he's still having an affair with the wife of a mujik. So he's really an impossible person if what we want is consistency and a kind of a reliability, a philosophical reliability. He's not reliable at all. I am so grateful that he didn't take that position before he'd written Anna Karenina. We may have lost another masterpiece when he made that decision not to write fiction anymore, but we have this book. So I'm really glad that he set this all down before he turned away from fiction. But I can't explain it. He became more and more difficult. He left all his literary property to that cult instead of to his children, so they were all penniless. He was a really difficult character to understand. So I can't explain him.
Roxana, one more comment about the fixed stars. We've heard several references to that. At the time that Tolstoy was writing, the fixed stars were actually held to be fixed. And they were part of classical Newtonian mechanics. They were fixed. They were in a fixed part of the celestial sphere, and other things like the Earth's rotation and the planets, of course, they moved, but they moved relative to the fixed stars. I think there were a handful of British astronomers who suspected, although they didn't have the right measurement tools, they suspected that the stars themselves moved, but the measurements were so small that at Tolstoy's time, the stars were still considered to be fixed. Therefore, it's ironic when Tolstoy fought against that and said, well, I'm pretty sure that the stars move. And I know that I'm wrong about that because it's really the Earth moving, but the stars seem to move. It turned out he was like maybe 50 years ahead of his time when astronomers realized that the stars, in fact, are moving. So Tolstoy was right, but for the wrong reasons.
That's so interesting. As I was reading that, I was thinking, so is this so thank you for elucidating that point. That is really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So I'd like to say a word in defense of the ending, but before, just to add my thanks, everyone else's, to you, Roxana, for this 2-month course. I was looking back at my calendar. Our first class was January 12th, and you think of January 12th, wow. It was the darkest, coldest part of winter. COVID deaths were going through the roof. A lot of us were wondering just how are we going to get through these months. We can't eat outdoors anymore. We can't see friends. We can't see family in the same way. And here we are with our last class. And in the East Coast where we are, it's a sunny day. It's a warm day. Spring is coming. People are getting vaccinated. There is a future. And to spend this time not just with you, but with Anna Karenina and the entire story, week after week, has just been wonderful. Now about the ending, it is kind of long for an epilogue, but there are two key characters in this book. I mean, we talk about the two couples, but within the two couples, there is Anna and there is Levin. And Levin, suffers from existential angst, which is a big thing and kind of a modern thing. You talk about spirituality, but actually, he sort of finds the meaning of life really not in spirituality, but in what any existentialist would see in the meaning of life. It's how you live your life, the decisions you make as an individual day in and day out. It's the quotidian. And so this is his revelation. And because Tolstoy is so brilliant that even when you resolve that it's all about how I live my life, I'm going to not be like the bad merchant who screws the peasants. I'm going to be like the good guy who can't afford to do the land. But then when as soon as he makes these resolutions, as you point out, he isn't so good, because he's human. And that it ends with him looking at the stars and having cosmic thoughts. And then Kitty comes and says, let's make sure that the washstand is right in the guest room. And actually, that's what's important, is getting the washstand right in the guest room. And so many other acts like that, being the good husband, being the good father, being the good landlord. So I thought, it was a nice counterpoint to, Anna's death spiral, sort of his discovering the meaning of life. That was worth an extra section.
Good. Thank you for that defense. I'm glad to hear it. You're absolutely right. Yeah, he's moving into a different direction, and also he is defending the power of marriage and the power of family.
I just want to add to that. I completely agree with that, and I think that explains the toothache, and that explains why Anna's name is not mentioned in the last section. in the Jewish religion, there's this idea, or in the culture of l'chaim, that life is what we have. We don't think about not life. And I think that in that way, this book sort of represents that. It really is how to live, what to do, with the emphasis on live. And that also goes to the vengeance is mine, I will repay. He'll take care of, some other power will take care of the people that are gone. The book keeps reminding us that the things of life are what we have to concern ourselves with, and that which we don't know. Even you, who know this book better than any of us, I dare say, you're left with these questions. And I think it's such a good, an appropriate way to teach it is for us not to have some sort of Keatsian negative capability. We can't know everything. All the questions aren't answered. What we do know is that there's a toothache, that we can make promises about what we'll do, but we're embodied. We're embodied and imperfect, and we'll snap and so I don't know, somehow the life is what is important here.
Yeah. That's a really nice way to put it. Thank you, Robin. Yeah.
Thinking about that, this is Franny Tolliver.
Hi,
Thinking about that in connection with Romans 12, which is where vengeance is mine appears. That verse is a very small part of that chapter, which in fact is all about how to live a good life. If you look at it, it's full of recommendations of good things that you can do for other people and how to overcome evil with good. And it's so much like leaven that it seems to me that that's the context makes the epigraph weighted towards leaven.
That is really interesting. Thank you, Franny, for giving me that context. I did not know that. So I will look that chapter up. Yeah, I think that makes much more sense of it. I don't think the book is about vengeance. I don't think Anna's act was really about vengeance, and vengeance doesn't seem to drive this book. So if it's about how to lead your life, which we've been talking about from the beginning, and that God is sort of an overarching presence, that makes it make much more sense.
So I think this group tends to be probably over the age of 40, 50. And I was wondering whether you would comment on what it's like to teach this book to a college age audience, particularly because it is so driven by passion. And I wonder, maybe it's my jaundiced view of this younger generation, how they can relate to the kind of passion that happened between Anna and Vronsky, how they can relate to the kind of passion that Levin has for Kitty. It's a self-select group that takes your courses, obviously, but I'm wondering what kind of insights you might want to share about that.
It's a graduate course, so they're not undergraduates, and sometimes they are in their 30s or 40s, but most of them are probably late 20s, early 30s, something like that. So I don't know if I told you all this, but the first time I taught this book at Hunter, no one had taught it before, and I was afraid it was too long. It's a 13-week or 14-week semester, and I teach it in, well, I thought it was too long. It was going to take up too much time in the semester, but I wanted them to read it, and so I assigned them the first 300 pages. We read for 2 weeks. We read 150 pages each, and one of my students in the second week said, "I have a question, Professor," and I said, about the book, and I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Could we finish this book in class?" And my thought had been that they would fall in love with the book and they would finish it on their own, and I didn't have to take up the entire semester. But he said, I don't want to give it up, and I want to go on discussing it in class. And so I got in touch with the I asked if I could change my syllabus in the middle of the semester, and they said yes. So I finished it, but they love it. And I think it's, you know, everyone under what Tolstoy does so powerfully is to move us into the depths of each of these characters. And every younger generation is still filled with feelings. They all have feelings. They're all very strong, and they are completely engaged by these characters. The other thing is that we read Madame Bovary first, and Emma Bovary, as you know, the stories are similar, but Emma Bovary is so shallow compared to Anna. When she wants to run away with her lover, she's planning on leaving her daughter. She doesn't actually care about who she's in love with. She just wants a lover. So the movement from Madame Bovary, which is really interesting on many levels, but this particular aspect of it, a deep, complex, generous, loving, vital heroine. Those characters are very different, and the students really fall in love with Anna. She has so much to offer and is so full of a generosity of spirit, especially in contrast to Emma, whom we've just left. They become very engaged. In fact, one of my students, the course requires 2 papers, and one can be a creative paper. And one of my students wrote a short story, which is a coda to this book. And it's about Vronsky, who comes back and kidnaps his daughter, Annie, who has gone off to live with Karenina because she's his legal child. And it's a beautifully written story. And she sets it up with Vronsky bribing the governess, the nanny, to bring the child out early in the morning, and the carriage driving up, and Vronsky getting out of the carriage and picking up his daughter and taking her off in this shadowy space with the horses clopping along. Anyway, they become very engaged with it. They love it. So, any other questions or observations?
This is very, very small, but I wondered if anybody else noticed that moment in the section where Levin is lying in the grass, and he moves aside the little leaf of Angelica so that the bug that he sees can get where it's going, and then a line or two later, he says to himself, "Oh, he didn't really want to go that way. After all, he flew away." And I just thought it was, I don't know why it just struck me so powerfully, but I suppose it's partly that it's, here's Levin attributing agency even to this tiny little bug. But it's also funny because you can kind of imagine him in that moment when he's feeling very exalted, that he's doing this benevolent thing even for this little bug, by moving aside the leaf, sort of this kind of godlike gesture, and then Tolstoy, undercuts the whole thing or overturns it by having the bug just fly off in another direction. He wasn't really headed that way anyway. So I just loved that.
I know that moment, and I agree with you. There is always this. I mean, one of the great things about Tolstoy is the closeness of his observations. So all the writers among you understand that you're told observation is essential, and these small details, the fact that Kitty's her clasp caught on the lace as she's buttoning her coat, and we'll remember so many of these moments because of the intensity of Tolstoy's observation. So one of the things, if you are curious and want to go on reading about Tolstoy or reading his work, there is something on the Cornwall Library website, I think, has a list of things that I suggest. And one of them is this biography by Rosamund Bartlett. And there's a wonderful Zoom lecture that she gave that you can find on YouTube. I guess it's YouTube, not, but if you Google it, you'll find it. And I watched it, and she's giving a talk. She also did a translation of Anna Karenina, which I have not read, but she wrote this biography of him, and she's a very good speaker. And she talks about the trials of translation, and she speaks very good Russian, as I believe. And there's a passage, the passage that I read to you about the spring coming to the landscape and how the water is moving underneath the ice and the land is turning, you can smell the earth. And there's a part that says the bees fly to the newly green catkins. Well, so in our translation, it just says the bees fly from the apiaries from the hives to the catkins. She said that she did research on this and learned using 19th century Russian beekeepers' manuals, which she found in some very obscure archival site, that the word that was used there actually didn't just mean bees that were released. It was that bees go dormant in the winter, and in the spring they are moved, the hives are moved to a new place so that pollination can take place. And then some shuttle or something is opened, and they're released for the first time in the spring. And this word in Russian refers specifically to a bee that has just been released for the first time in the spring. And that's the bee that crosses the meadow and goes to the catkin. So the specificity of his observation is so gorgeous. It just allows us to inhabit this world. I did have one student who kept not showing up for class and not saying anything. I finally asked him to come and talk to me, and I said, what's going on? It doesn't seem as though you're engaging in this class. And he said, yeah, these books are not doing it for me. And I said, why is that? And he said, why should I care about 19th century Russian aristocrats? But that's the question. Why should I read fiction? Why should I read about anyone else but me? So that's kind of a fundamental problem and has nothing to do with Tolstoy. But for me, Tolstoy creates these scenes with such detail, such attentiveness, and such respect for everything, for the human experience and the human condition, that I can't help but feel present in every one of these scenes. And it's partly due to exactly what you're talking about. There's the bug, there's the kind of plant that it's climbing on, Angelica. And this is what happens if you, a human, try to direct another creature in its life. This is Tolstoy's observation. The scenes about the mowing, the way the grass smells, the way it looks lying in swaths, the way the mujiks take off their kaftans, the way the drops of rain feel on sweaty skin. All of that creates a world for us to inhabit. And he does it in a way that I find, I'm so grateful to Tolstoy for allowing me to inhabit that world. And I do think fiction is a sort of a unifying presence in the world of our consciousness, that the way we find our way to other people is through this kind of empathy. And it allows people who read the ability to travel the world and to travel the centuries and to find our way into other people's lives. And Tolstoy does it in a way that is almost unmatched.
Yeah. Did you say that Bartlett was giving a Zoom talk?
Bartlett, if you Google her, you will find it on YouTube. I think
it's on YouTube.
I think that's where it is. She gave it, I think, at the Russian language department at the University of Michigan, something like that. And it's relatively recent. I mean, within the last few years, I don't remember what, but you can find it. She's a good speaker, and it's interesting.
Roxana, that was so, this is Ginny Pye. That was so beautiful what you just said, and kind of pulled it all together. And I just want to thank you for all of it, all of how you've led this class. And but just something about those surprising words about sort of the power of fiction just hit home, and I'm guessing it did with maybe all the writers, but and because that's our ambition, of course, and our hope for what we do. But it's just so beautiful. Thank you. All of it's been beautiful. Thanks.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. All of you make this a great session, really.
Do you think you'll do another book with the Cornwall Library?
You know, so I've done it for a year. I started this last March, at the end of last March, because of COVID. And for the first, I don't know what, 10 weeks or something, what I did each week was I just thought this up, but we were all in the dark. We were all frightened. We didn't know what was going to happen next. And so each Wednesday I would read a short story, a great short story out loud. And then I would talk about it. We'd have a discussion about it. And I did that for about 10 weeks. And then I did Madame Bovary in, I think, early June for 3 weeks.
Oh.
And then it was summer and people could be more active. And so we went into hiatus, and I thought it would be over, but it wasn't over. So I've done Anna. I've loved doing it. I don't have plans. I think now we are in a different state, and I don't have plans to do another book at this moment. If I do, we have everybody's name and email address, and we'll certainly keep you posted. But it is something that sort of takes up this, it occupies the center of my week. And so it's been something I can't keep doing indefinitely.
Roxana, just to go back to this book for a second, it's Robert here. I'm going way back to when Vronsky kicked the horse, and it just stuck in my mind as I couldn't figure that out and couldn't figure it out. I mean, here was this incredibly organized, self-disciplined guy who even figured out which bills he was going to pay, 3 different piles. And his regiment loved him, and he's so organized. And why does he do this terrible thing? And I went back, and in the 3 or 4 pages before, on 3 different pages, Tolstoy mentions how Vronsky was feeling self-loathing on pages 184, 186, and 188, groundless loathing. He's loathing himself. And so my 184, 186, and 188, strange feeling of loathing came over him. And I think what he was doing is he was kicking himself when he kicked the horse. He really, then Anna tells him on 187 that she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And he realizes that he's really screwed everything up. And, he's never done anything like that in his life before. Everything has been so calm and right. And he takes it out on the horse, the way we do when we take things out on our kids, And this horse is this beautiful horse. I mean, it's not a male horse, it's a beautiful horse, beautiful female horse, whose name is Frou Frou. I mean, come on, Tolstoy is having fun with that one, right? Something available on Victoria's Secret. I mean, come on. And so he's kicking himself. I think, it's the only way I could explain that scene, which was so shocking when he does it.
Absolutely shocking. And that's a good point. I hadn't put those 2 things together. Yeah. It's a terrible thing for him to do. It's just terrible. And Tolstoy, being a writer himself and loving horses, is intimately aware of how terrible a thing this is to do. But that's why I say that Vronsky is really a cipher. He doesn't seem to be someone that I can be sure of. I don't understand his motivations. And that scene of him paying his bills makes him into somebody that I trust. He's rational, he's responsible. He's going to sell his horses because he can't afford to keep them. That's a rational response that Stiva Oblonsky doesn't have. And so we're told to trust Vronsky there. But that day, the day of the race, what he does, do you remember how he does the wrong thing? He drives all the way to see Anna, and there isn't any time. I keep going over the time. It's like Bobby Ann Mason pointing out that Kitty has been pregnant for a year. There isn't enough time for him to get to Anna and back to the stable and back to the racetrack. And yet he does it. And we know it's wrong. And that sets up a feeling of distrust for Vronsky. Then he does the right thing when she says she's pregnant. He steps up, he realizes everything has changed, but his response is honorable. The other thing about Frou Frou, do you remember that for those of you who are riders, Frou Frou is a very fine-boned horse, and Gladiator, who is her most immediate competitor, is big and powerful and strong. And you immediately have a feeling, I have a feeling of anxiety. She's not going to be able to stand up to this. She's too fine-boned, she's too high-strung. She's a mare, and Gladiator is a gelding or a stallion, and he's this great big powerful engine with a big powerful man on him, and Vronsky is too big for Frou Frou. This is too much for her, and we get that from the very beginning. She's supple and springy and beautiful, but too delicate for this. And then he kicks her out of rage, but he kicks her with the back of his heel. He doesn't even kick her with his toe. And there's something contemptuous as well as furious about kicking someone with the back of your heel. It's one of the terrible moments in the book.
And then of course, Anna dies. I mean, this is, I think.
Yes, it's definitely a foreshadowing.
Yeah, right. Thanks. Thank you for this course, by the way.
Bravo. Fabulous. And
Thank
Margaret from Cornwall Library.
Thank
Gonna
you,
miss ya.
Margaret. Thank you all. Really, thank you, Roxana, so much.
Yes.
It's been my pleasure. I guess we're so I said I'd go till 2 hours for anyone who wanted to finish. I think we've come to the end of it, unless anyone has a final question.
No, just thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks to all of you, really. I have loved taking this journey with all of you. So thank you. Those of you who have written me notes, thank you for the notes, and thank you for all of you who have made donations to the library.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So generous of you.
Thank you very much, Roxana.
Thank you, Roxana. Bye.
Thank
bye-
you,
bye all.
Roxana. Thank you all.